Welcome everyone. Really looking forward to a good discussion today. I'm just waiting for a few more people to kind of enter the webinar. I hope things are well with you. It's absolutely gorgeous weather out there, at least down south here. So I hope things are going well. As you know, we're going to be talking a little bit about resilience today. And so just before we kind of kick off the main kind of panel discussion, I just wanted to give our panelists a little bit of a chance to introduce themselves. I'm just going to kind of start by saying I'm Rowan Myron, and I work for the College of Nursing, Midwifery and Healthcare at the university. I'm a psychologist by background, and I'll be chairing things today. So my job is just really to let other people speak and make sure that we don't go over time. So Jordan, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself? You know, a little bit of a word picture of kind of, you know, where you're coming from, what's your background, who did you want to be when you grew up?
Okay, cool. Well, firstly, thank you for having me, Rowan. My name's Jordan. I studied broadcast journalism at UWL. I'm now brand manager for a number of the world's biggest footballers. And when I was younger, probably Beckham, if I'm being completely honest. I wanted to be Beckham. Had the haircuts, had the shirts. So I'll go David Beckham.
And you know, do you feel you're almost got there?
You know what? Looking at it, there's probably nothing about us that is even similar. No, probably not. But I gave it a good go for a couple of years, and then went into football the same way. Yes, yes. I'm very driven, but I'll take that.
Thanks very much, Jordan. Julie, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rowan. My name's Julie. I am a graduate of UWL, and my subject was information management with publishing studies. And since those days, I carved out my career in Fortune 500 companies in a variety of sectors and industries. And this ranges from media, publishing, procurement operations, and manufacturing. And I've been lucky enough to work for the big global companies. So I've traveled the world with my work, which has been amazing opportunities and experiences. And more recently, I'm a coach and a mentor. I'm particularly interested in mindfulness and mindset and keeping a positive mindset. So super happy to be here to be talking about resilience, especially during these times. And when I was growing up, I wanted to be just like Kate Adie. She was on the news and in the media a lot in those days. And I just thought, I just liked the way she talked to camera and reported. And she was coming from all strange places at that time I hadn't heard of. And I just thought that was a mega amazing job to have. I didn't go into the media as a journalist or a reporter, but I have traveled. I've traveled the world a lot, which has been great.
Almost as much as Kate Adie.
Not quite.
Get to travel a lot with all of that.
But I did, you're right, yes.
Thanks very much, Julie. And Nikki,
you're welcome.
Give us a little bit of a word picture about yourself and who you wanted to be when you grew up.
Yes, I will do. So I worked as a nurse in the NHS, a mental health nurse for many, many years. And I've recently completed a piece of research on well-being in the NHS for staff, looking at resilience, teamwork, and job satisfaction. So really interested in what we'll be talking about today. And I wanted to be Sheila Ferguson when I grew up, and she's the lead singer of the 3 Degrees. And failing that, I wanted to be one of the Pips with Gladys Knight.
That sounds like such a fun dream.
Frustrated singer. I always thought I'd make quite a good singer or a backing singer.
Well, maybe we can do a little number, you know, towards the end of the panel. Great. So I'm going to kick off the questions. I'm going to ask the panel some questions. We're going to have a bit of a discussion. And if it sparks off something for you while you're listening, then there is a Q&A function. If you want to submit a question, we'll have a time just after the questions where we'll take questions from the audience. So if I can start by asking you guys, what does resilience mean to you? If I can start with Nikki first.
I guess to me, it means being able to cope with the setbacks that life presents to us all. As a nurse, I think resilience helps you to develop the skills to be able to manage the stress that you often encounter. And I think what that then happens as a result of that is you have the skills to be able to function more effectively at work. I think as a human being, being resilient is about managing stress, adapting in a more positive way, and then being able to look after myself as well. And I think that's really important for any nurses that might be listening, that ability to look after you whilst caring for others. So it's a combination of those things for me.
Yeah, that's a good dimension, isn't it, when you're thinking about caring for others, but then also self-care as well.
Yes.
Jordan, any comments?
Resilience for me probably is the ability to take on potentially traumatic information, compartmentalize it, and keep going forward. That's what I think, looking back at times when I've had to overcome certain things, that's the best way I would define it.
So is that for you about not letting it bleed into your life or obstruct your life, that you can kind of compartmentalize it and move past it?
Yeah, 100%, almost taking the emotion out of it. It is what it is type of thing. That has to get locked away, but there's still a bigger picture to get to.
Yeah, now that's a really good perspective. Julie, would you agree?
I do. I aspects of what both Nikki and Jordan were just saying certainly resonates, and I think for me resilience means strength and courage. And if I look back across my life in corporate and just in general, really, there's the ups and downs, whether it's life or within work. So it's being able to balance work and life, for sure. And to do that, it's taking a step back. So when not so good stuff happens, it's just to take stock of what's going on for you and being aware of the situation so that you can deal with the stresses and strains. Sometimes that's easier said than done, so it is something to practice. But for sure, it's taking a step back, being aware, and then moving forward from that point on. I would say just take that perspective, take the deep breath, and then move on.
So I think, I mean, leading on from that point, Julie, there is a big debate in the literature about whether resilience is innate. So are you born being a resilient person, or actually can you build it? I mean, you were talking there about kind of, building resilience. Do you particularly think it's innate, or is it learnable?
I would say a bit of both. And why I say that is when we're really, really small, we've got to learn an awful lot about the world around us, including getting mobile, right? So if you didn't have a bit of resilience when you were learning to walk, you'd never be walking, because otherwise you'd still be stuck on falling over in some ways. Certainly as you get older and you learn more about relationships, negotiating, and all these kind of soft skills, I suppose you could say, those are certainly things that take some learning. And I think when you start working for big companies, any work situation really that's a large organization, you've got many cultures and dynamics to learn about, different communication styles, different ways of working, all sorts of things. And that's before you get on to how departments are structured and who works with whom and so on. So all of that takes learning, because you have to seek to understand first what's going on before you jump to conclusions or make assumptions about either people or the working situation. So that's all folded in really, I think, to learning how to be a professional. But those skills are life skills anyway, arguably. So for me, it's a combination of two. I think certainly there's an aspect of it's a certain steely quality is in us, and probably 20-30%, and the rest is learned ability. I would say.
And Jordan, would you agree? I mean, you obviously are working with a lot of top athletes and top sportsmen. Would you say that they're born resilient, or is that something that they learned or that you learn?
I think probably that you have to learn it. But I think you have to learn it quite early on, like Julie said about the whole walking, otherwise everyone still be crawling around. I think it must get to a stage where, I don't know, perhaps you would know more, but after maybe 5 or 10 years old, that you probably couldn't learn it anymore. Maybe the reaction you get from your parents and the way you negotiate for different things. But I think looking back at the people I know and the experiences I've been through, early trauma does build resilience, I believe. But that's not to say that, yeah, it potentially could be innate and maybe it's in you from the start, and some people might not have it. But I would lean towards it can be learned up until a certain point.
Interesting perspective. Nikki, I know you've done some work in the NHS with people on this. Would you say it's learnable even beyond childhood?
Absolutely learnable is what I would say. I think I do agree with what Jordan and Julia have both said. And I do think, you know, some people are, for whatever circumstance, more resilient as children and grow on and learn different skills. But equally, you can have children in the same family, one more resilient than the other. And you would argue they're both being socialized in exactly the same way. For me, you can learn to become more resilient and more emotionally intelligent, I guess. So I think you can teach people to become more self-aware, to help them be more self-aware in terms of exploring how they respond emotionally to different circumstances. You can make people feel more hopeful. And I always think all these things are a bit like a muscle. And the more you practice changing your thinking and your reaction to things, you're able to build on that initial bit of learning. I think you can help people become more pragmatic, because I do think often being resilient is about being quite pragmatic as a person. So it's about being able to manage, adapt in a positive manner, but also kind of building on your self-awareness so that everything becomes a learning experience. So you learn on previous experiences that haven't gone as well, identify what you did well, and do more of that going forward.
That's a really interesting perspective. We've got a question from you guys out there. Does our need to resolve things for people to support them, does that mean that they're not resilient? As in, the more we do, the less they learn about resilience. Do you think that once you're resilient, it's always there, or do you just stop relying on it if your parents are helicopter parents, I think it's called? What do you think about that, Nikki?
I think that it changes, doesn't it? And there are times in life, I would consider myself, for example, to be quite a resilient person, but there have been times when that's really been tested. And I guess, you know, if you're caring for others, yes, you need to be resilient, but it doesn't mean that someone in psychological distress isn't resilient. It just means they might need a bit of help at that moment in time. And with the right help and support, actually their resilience going forward can equally improve. So I think, yes, absolutely, you could, because you help people doesn't mean they lack resilience and you have more. It just is about circumstance sometimes and taking that step forward.
Some people need a bit of an extra help at some points in their life.
And we all do. One of us, you know, we can't predict that going forward for any of ourselves, can we?
True, very true.
Yes.
Julie, would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think another aspect of resilience is, as I was mentioning before, the courage aspect. And it takes some courage sometimes in some circumstances to actually reach out for help. So whether that's from teachers or a counselling service, or you knock on the door of charity services that are available, you know, wherever that is, or family and friends even. Sometimes the hardest bit is just saying, I'm going through a rough patch. I haven't got everything under control that I would normally have under control, and I just want to chat. So I think that's a big part for it as well, to just be aware that you're going to need that from time to time, whatever stage of life, actually.
I'm really interested from your perspective, Jordan. Is there a male-female thing about this? Do guys have a harder time saying, I'm having a bit of a hard time, I just need a bit of help, which is what we've just been talking about? Do footballers? What do you think?
It's a really tough. The strongest and most resilient person I know is probably my mother. By far and away, I've never met anyone as resilient or mentally strong as her. I do think there are some footballers that, yeah, obviously what they go through, they're also very resilient. But I'm working with a footballer at the minute, and we're trying to get more men to talk about their mental health, because it is something that men struggle with. So I think there is an issue. I think there is a stigma, but in terms of female and male, from what I see personally, I think, yeah, my mother was the strongest, most resilient person I know for sure.
It's interesting, isn't it? There's so many different nuances and dimensions to this. My next question was actually going to be about top tips for building resilience, and we have a question from the audience. What's the best way to try and build your resilience? Do you have any suggestions, Jordan?
Staying positive. I was talking to someone recently who's going through a bit of a tough time, who probably isn't that resilient. They'd be quite open about that. And I said to them that nothing is permanent, everything's temporary. Keep going, stay strong, set goals, even if they're small goals, and you will get through it. But I think a huge thing is stay positive mental outlook, exercise a lot, stay fit and healthy, eat well, and give yourself the best chance you can.
Julie, would you add anything to that?
What I was thinking as Jordan was talking there is, funnily enough, a quote from the Exotic Marigold Hotel film, if anybody's seen that. And the reason I say that is because the phrase I love from that film is, everything will be all right in the end. And if it isn't all right, it isn't the end. And I think it's really important to stay focused on whatever it is right now, it will pass. It might not seem like it in some moments, but it will pass. And so for sure, as Jordan was saying just now, exercise, diet, good sleep is all very important, but sometimes these worries can run away with you, so it interrupts your sleep. So I think being aware of what you need to recharge or to feel lighter and brighter in your day, whether that's going out for a walk, going for a run, going for a cycle, just know that's what you need to do. And knowing yourself is a big part of this. What do you need to do? And I think as well, for me, I've always been somebody to laugh at myself first before anybody else gets the chance. So humor is a big influence in my life. I try to see the funny side of things to help change perspective for me. And that would be the last piece of advice. If there's anything you can do just to turn the angle around and change perspective on what the problem is, and try not to awfulize it too far into the future. Stay as much as you can in the present moment. What's good and great about right now, there will be a positive element in there somewhere. So hold on to that.
I've found gratitude quite useful, you know, having that kind of gratitude journal to just remind myself of the good things instead of focusing on the bad things.
That's right. And you find, I don't know about you, but quite often you find that list is quite long, actually, even in times of lockdown and all sorts of mad things going on.
Nikki, would you add anything?
I would say know your strengths as well as your weaknesses. And I think there's a real temptation sometimes when we're in a bad place or really struggling with something to focus on our weaknesses. Know your strengths and manage things, if it helps, on a day-to-day basis, rather than how you're going to get through this awful period of time. What can I do today? Because that's the bit within our control. I think taking time out to refresh yourself mentally, physically, go for a walk, mindfulness, whatever, and focus on the bits that you can manage now, and believe that things will get better. Because I think it's that perspective thing that Julie just mentioned. That's really important. You have to kind of believe that things will get better, and surround yourself with good people that you can talk to.
Yeah, an important part, that the environment and the people you connect with
Absolutely
aren't kind of being, We have another question from you guys out there. I consider myself to be very resilient and pragmatic when it's needed. However, I'm equally emotional and sensitive. How can these two opposites get an equilibrium? Do you see them as as opposites, being sensitive and being resilient, or do you think that's actually a much more nuanced picture, Nikki?
I think they're not opposites at all. I'm a highly emotional person, but what I've done as a resilient human being is I have learned, it took a while, to take the emotion out of situations and view them differently. But because I'm quite self-aware, I know that my immediate response to anything is an emotionally driven response. But that helps me, actually, that emotion, when I reflect on it, to understand why I responded in the way I did, why I said what I did, you know, how it's influenced my behavior. So now I'm able to put it aside a bit and deal with what's in front of me, and then allow the emotion to come back in. But being emotionally intelligent is really important. It's an important part of being resilient, isn't it?
Definitely. And actually, there's another question going back to that issue we were discussing earlier about the difference between men and women. And I'm just wondering, Jordan, if you've got any comments on that. Does being emotional mean you're not resilient? Are men stereotypically seen as less emotional than women? Do you think that's an element in resilience?
I don't know. I would say I couldn't agree more with Nikki. I am probably highly emotional. A lot of my decision making is done on emotion. And before I would leap into stuff, making very over the top gestures and all sorts. But I think as the time goes on, I've taken the emotion out of situations. I think now it's about channeling it. So if you do feel emotional, you feel wronged or something, it's channeling that in a better way to push yourself forward. But yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Nikki said. In terms of male and female, potentially there is, yeah, potentially men don't like to show their emotion too much or that type of thing. So perhaps there is something there, but I can definitely say that, yeah, I was highly emotional and still am for a lot of the decisions I make. And if I'm treated a certain way and it makes me feel a certain way, I'll make sure that people know it. However, I've learned to kind of shelter that a bit and use it in a better way.
Julie, would you add anything to that?
I think it's perfectly fine to acknowledge the emotional aspects of your being and your character. And I would say that a personal hard lesson that I learned is suppressing my emotions in the workplace eventually led to burnout. So you have to be true. There's an element of being true to yourself and standing up or speaking out for what you believe is important or right or fair, depending what the situation is. At the same time, to echo what Nikki and Jordan were both saying, there's a way to do that with practice so that you aren't construed as the hysterical person in the corner all the time or whatever. So there are ways to learn how to channel that better over time. But I think it's perfectly acceptable to acknowledge the emotions. You need those feelings inside to guide decisions and responses and basically how you manage your life. So ignore them at your peril. Acknowledge and embrace them, because happily we're all different.
And we have a question from the audience, as it were, that what do you feel would be a good technique for young people with mental health difficulties to build on resilience? I know there might be some students out there, students who are going through resits and who might be feeling quite pressured. And I also know, you know, we're coming to the end of this year of lockdown where a number of people are feeling very pressured or have had challenges. Would you say there's a good technique for building resilience in young people, Nikki?
Yeah, I think I always think focus on what you can do and always think about how you can connect to other people. And I do think coming out of lockdown, that's going to be really difficult for some people. And I think all of us are going to struggle a bit. So it's about acknowledging that might well be difficult for everybody, but in different ways. So keep connected to people, but kind of manage your physical and mental health alongside that. But I always think if I know a period of time is going to be difficult for me, I almost, if you're lucky enough to have the opportunity, I prepare for it. So I think, right, I need to be in the best state of health mentally and physically for this. I need to, like, I know that I've got a really stressful week, for example. So I've kept to my sleep routine. I've walked the dog who's barking twice a day. You know, I've done those things that I can practically do to acknowledge this will be difficult, but I can manage this because I'm going to do it bit by bit, day by day to get through the week. And use, if we're talking about university students, we have tremendous support for university students at UWL, better than most places, I would say. So use the support that's available. Get yourself in a little study buddy group or whatever, which I know has worked really well for me. Do that, you know, connect with other people, acknowledge this is difficult, and then think about all the strengths that you have to enable you to manage this.
Yeah, great. Jordan, would you add to that? Would you say physical exercise, getting out there, playing football will help?
Yeah, I'd 100% agree. Keeping active, definitely just look after you. I think there's a big thing in young people comparing their lives with everyone else's. I think focus on you. I quite like the gratitude list. I know a lot of footballers do it, write what they're grateful for. But I'd probably honestly say come off social media, stay away from it for a little while. Just focus on you, do what you want to do. If you want to sit and order a pizza and watch a film, do it. Just focus on you. Don't worry about what anyone else is doing. And I'm pretty certain slowly but surely you'll get back to yourself if you have good sleeping patterns, drink well, eat well, exercise well, you'll get to where you need to be.
Julie, would you add anything?
I would say that for anybody who's feeling like it's, you mentioned there might be students listening who are going through resits or just the general pressure of exams and all sorts of things like this at the moment. I think to add to the gratitude list and the other pieces of advice we just heard from Nikki and Jordan would be to maybe sit down and reflect on life achievements you have to date. And one exercise I found effective to do is you just list out 100, and you might think, I can't think of 100, but you soon can actually, even if it's like the simplest thing, passing your GCSE exams or getting your A-levels, passing a driving test, speaking a foreign language, these kind of things. And that might seem not that significant. When you've written out 100 of those things though, you read them all together. So you read them one after another, and then you just stick it on your walls. You keep reading them. So when you think things are getting or feeling a bit overwhelming, or you've lost sight of what you can do, look at your list of 100 achievements and you'll be amazed. And also notice what that feels like when you read your own list of achievements. So that's a really powerful exercise.
It is. And I know when I was a student, the student union was a big thing for me. You know, that was a big place to go for support. And I know the university here has a good student union with, you know, great ideas and innovative ideas. So if you are struggling as a student, check in with academic support services or student union, because they can actually be really great. So the next question was around how do you build resilience if life has beaten you? You know, where do you start if you're kind of at a really low point? Do you have any top tips for where you could start, Julie?
You can have days or periods of times like that. That's true. Sometimes it can feel like there is no way out, or it's very hard, or that it feels as if everyone's slamming doors in your faces. I would say it's partly an emotional response, and it's inward looking, and sometimes you need to just do the things like Jordan was saying a moment ago, just binge watch on Netflix and eat a pizza or something like this, and because you just feel that that's all that's all the energy you have at the moment to do that. I think the other pieces of advice that we've heard on this call just this evening, based on our experiences, shows that it's connection, and it's who can you tap into. Hopefully there is at least one person somewhere at university or in your network of friends or family and so on, who you can just turn to talk to, or watch that comedy show that you know always makes you laugh. Laughter is a huge feel-good factor and remedy, and it's just such a mood lifter. Or a piece of music that has the same impact on your muscle memory, really, and just trigger those happier memories and times that you've enjoyed. And I think lastly, to piece that all together is then use that to focus on it will get all right. It will be all right in the end. This will pass.
Nikki, would you add anything to that? I know you've worked with people who were in difficult places. What would you say? What advice would you give to someone who felt really beaten down?
Firstly, don't give yourself a hard time about that. All of us experience times where even the most simple of things seems impossible to achieve. So, you know, if you can't see the way ahead through the next week, just break it down into this morning, this afternoon, this evening, into small chunks of what you want to do that will make you feel better. That's what I would suggest, almost like, yeah, I don't have to think about tomorrow. Let's just think about today. What can I do? What can I manage to do today? And then remembering when you've managed to do something, to not celebrate it, but remind yourself of that. Because then I think it makes it easier to build on that. So it's starting small and beginning to build on it, and talking to other people. And I really like what Julie just said about music, because I know myself, one of the things that I do, I put disco music on if I'm really struggling, because I'm obviously that age, late 70s. So that automatic, no matter where I am emotionally, will make me, it will lift me. Sometimes people can use smells that make them feel comforted. So I think just use any resource that you have that makes you feel a bit better, and then build on the small chunks.
Would you add to that, Jordan? Sorry, Nikki.
Yeah, I think what Julie and Nikki have said bang on. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but when I was going through a bit of a sticky time, I remember I used to have a to-do list that wasn't very big, and I was trying to get work and I couldn't really get anything. And I used to put on the to-do list, walk the dog, go to the shop, along with other like work tasks. So at the end of the day, it would look longer in my head. I'd get a bit of satisfaction and think, yeah, I've smashed today. Yeah, I've done all right. But yeah, I think take each day one day at a time. Don't have to look forward. And as the other two ladies have said, everything's temporary. There's a bigger goal, and if it's not all right, it's not the end.
Yeah, speaking of music, I think there's a lyric from the Avenue Q musical, "The only thing permanent in life is death and taxes." You know, ultimately, everything else will pass. So there's another question. What advice would you give to people who don't have role models? So do you think role models is an important thing in being resilient? We talked a little bit earlier about kind of early life. Do you think role models are really important?
Which one of us?
Sorry, Jordan.
Oh, sorry. That's a really interesting question. And this might sound a bit of an abstract answer. But I used to be my own role model. I used to try and visualize the type of life and person that I wanted to be. I think 10 years down the line, okay, where do I want to be? What do I want to be doing? What does it feel like? And then that would be my role model, is that every day I would be living to try and get towards a step closer to that person, or to live like that. Whether that's the right or wrong way to go about it, I don't know, because it's ultimately unattainable. But that would be for me. Other than that, on a slightly lower scale, again, my mother, for a different reason, was a role model for a number of different things. So yeah, somewhere between the two.
Julie, have you got a particular role model? Or would you say role models are important?
It's an interesting question. I was just thinking, as Jordan was talking about the visualization piece, that's hugely important. And I was just trying to think back to my younger days. Did I have a role model? And nothing came to mind. Although that said, I was focused on becoming the better version of me. I always knew when I was a teenager that I would go away to university. Didn't know quite what to do and where that would be at certain parts of my teenage years, but I was always focused on that. And I just knew I wanted to be a trailblazer in my family somehow, as the first one to go away to university. But I didn't know what that meant or what that looked like. But I looked around me at my peers at school at that time. It's like, these are similar ambitions. What are my friends doing? And try and model that behavior. But that said, I think it was Oscar Wilde that said, be yourself, everyone else is taken. So it's really important to get to know yourself along this journey. It's always evolving. And as you get to know yourself better, then, as we've talked about already on this call, you get to know your strengths and your weaknesses, but also what's important to you. And to add to your reference to the lyrics just now, there's really two important days in your life: the day you were born and the day you find out why. So that's why it's really important just to keep going on your journey. You will find the role models as you visualize, experience life, and go about your business. People will come to you for a reason or be a part of your life. And you just got to be aware and look for the clues.
That's a good point. And Nikki, do you think that role models are just for when you're young, or do you think they kind of continue on throughout life?
I have never had a particular role model apart from my father, who's sitting in the other room. But I'm not him. And I've always known that you can never be someone else. So for me, throughout my life, personally and professionally, I look at others and think about the bits of them that I particularly like, and think about how that could be applied to myself to make myself a better person. So I was teaching all day today. I was teaching post-registration nurses, and we were doing a bit of role play, and a couple of them I thought, well, that's really nice. And actually the way they say that, the way they phrase that, I can think about how I can speak to people in a different way, because I think we're all on a journey. And as much as resilience can be learned, we have to learn about ourselves and who we are throughout the entirety of our life. And
True.
that's influenced by many.
That's what the interesting bit is, actually, because we change, interest changes, life changes, experience changes.
Yeah.
To learn, you never stop learning.
So there's a question, we talked a little bit earlier about emotion, taking the emotion out of it. So there was a question of, how do you do that? How do you take the emotion out of things? If you're feeling really emotional, how do you do that? Julie?
Personally, for me, it's removing myself from that contentious situation temporarily. So if it's an at work situation, or you're with people, sometimes you just have to excuse yourself from that situation, to say, I just need a 5-minute break, and just walk away for a minute or two. And the same can be said if it's if you're in the middle of a video call. I think it's just important to either not say anything, or say, I need some time to think about that, I'll come back to you. You can be seething inside. But to prevent yourself saying something or doing something that you might regret, just try and hold that in till you can go outside and scream where nobody can hear you, or till you can just go into a quiet room and cry your eyes out. Whatever the situation, I think just remove yourself and just do the self-care routines that work for you, whether that's deep breathing, listening to a bit of music for a while, or just taking half an hour out of your day. It's like pressing the reset button and then go back into that situation, because chances are you can't ignore it completely. You have to go back and deal with it and finish it off. But hopefully by then you're a little bit calmer.
Yes. Nikki, would you add to any of that?
I absolutely agree with everything Julie said. It took me years to learn how to do it.
Yes, I would agree with that as well.
I'm sure, if we were talking to me 20 years ago or 30 years ago, I was much more likely to respond quite quickly to things. But through trial and error of different techniques, what I do is, if I'm in a situation that I can't say, give me 5 minutes, I do a bit of self-talking in my head while someone is interacting with me. Then I take a deep breath and respond. So it's almost like what I do is I distance myself from what's being said. I have to say I don't get in those situations much anymore because I'm older. With emails, etc., or situations at work, what I do is I don't respond for 24 hours if I can. If something has lit my flame, I remove myself, think about it, and come back with a much more measured response. And I think if you're in a situation where you can go, do you know what, I need 5 minutes, that's fine, just walk away.
Jordan, would you agree that there's a comment in the question list about the stiff upper lip? Do you think that's an element of kind of, does that suppress the emotion, or do you have any tips on how you can remove the emotion from the situation?
definitely agree with what the two ladies have said so far. I'm not there yet on being able to fully not fly off the handle at certain things, but I'm getting there, and I'm learning. But I definitely think one of the first things that helped me was remembering that it's very rarely is it personal. If there's something that my boss has said, it's not personal. But it would be a slight bit of feedback that I would take such offense to that he would even dare challenge me on it. But it's not personal. It's just it's not him seeing me in a certain way. It's just for this project or something along them lines that it has to change. So when I started remembering that it's very rarely personal, and taking a good few hours before replying, or taking a deep breath if I can take 5, it made the process a lot easier.
So yeah, I think that's definitely an important thing, if you can take the space. But as Nikki says, you can't always take the space. But yeah, we've got a question here saying, naturally, some individuals are hot-tempered by nature. How can such people manage their resilience, especially men? Jordan, do you think?
I mean, I could have put that. Maybe I've put that question in the chat to get your ladies' response. No, I'm hot-tempered, can be very off the handle, and yeah, it's something that I'm working on. But I don't think that has to affect your resilience at all. I don't necessarily think that resilience is linked to that. So I would say channel it the best way you can. Take 5 if you can. If you have to, give yourself a breather. I've started meditating as well, and I find that quite useful. But I don't necessarily think being hot-tempered isn't the best thing in the world, but it can be channeled and it can drive you.
Yeah, I think that there's something about take the emotion out of the situation. If you're really hot-tempered, does that make it more difficult? Nikki, do you have anything to add?
I really agree actually with what Jordan was saying, and I just think, they're different things. I come from a hot-headed family actually, but we're all quite resilient, and I see the things as different. It's about being self-aware ultimately, isn't it? Understanding yourself, understanding your responses to situations, and managing that accordingly. And the more you practice managing your emotional side, the more able you are to do that.
Yeah. Julie, would you add anything on that hot-tempered issue?
Oh yes, well, I was just thinking back to my 25-year-old self. Completely different character. And so I would quite often get myself into hot water because it would just be flare up, and it's just in there with the response and reactions and so on. So I can relate somewhat to the question that came through, but I absolutely think for me personally, as Nikki was saying, the hot temper or the immediate it's out, the response is out, versus resilient are two different things. Yeah, I think, I mean, for me personally, like Nikki was saying, I've learned to channel that energy much differently now. And so when I see that behavior coming at me, like Jordan was saying, and kind of distance it in some ways, because the behavior is not necessarily the person. Something else entirely is probably going on for them in that moment. And it's quite likely nothing to do with you. So I think that's an important point to keep in mind.
Yeah, so that actually leads on to the next question from the audience about boundaries. So the question is, how big a part does setting boundaries play in resilience? Just what you were saying there, Julie, it's kind of almost like it's not about me. And sometimes that's a kind of boundary you can put up to not presume everything's about you. Would you say that boundaries play an important part?
Yes, for sure. Certainly not taking things personally is a huge one, because again, if I think back on my own personal experience over the years, when I took everything to heart, that was a very miserable place to be in some ways, because I ended up taking on a lot of other people's emotional energy as a result and couldn't process it all. So certainly personal boundaries are very, very important. And as we were speaking about earlier, another example of that is cell phones. Just make sure you have your downtime, because at the end of the day, your cell phone or your mobile phone is for your convenience, not everyone else's. So if you decide this is my hour in the day where I am not looking at my devices, then stick to that. You are allowed to. There's just a couple of examples of setting boundaries, really, and to know that it's okay. Because once you let other emotion and other people's drama into your sacred space, really, it stays there, and you hold that. So you have to be strict with yourself and not allow that to happen, unless you did accidentally hurt somebody and you think, yeah, that's my fault, can't blame anybody else, I'm so sorry, can I take you to the A&E department or something like that. But everything else, for sure, develop the ability to set some healthy boundaries.
So I've got a question for Nikki about nursing. What do you think about the debate in nursing around resilience? Is there a danger of nurses feeling that they're failing if they can't cope?
I think there is really quite a risk of that. But what I would say is no one human being is resilient 100% of the time. Nursing is a really difficult and complicated job. And what we can do is we can learn ways to manage our stress, and that ties into being resilient. So I know with our student nurses, for example, we're now from day one when they start their training, getting them to think about how they maintain their personal health and well-being. And then throughout their training, how they can develop those skills to be able to manage stress, become more self-aware, become emotionally intelligent. And if we think about the COVID experience that many nurses have been through, I think most of us wouldn't argue that's an incredibly stressful time that they've lived through. They will have seen and witnessed and been involved in situations that they never wished to. It's okay always to feel like you're struggling sometimes, but the big thing is to then reach out to other people, treat yourself with kindness, ensure that you do all those things that we know will help us manage and build our resilience, such as your sleep hygiene, diet and exercise, having friends, avoiding situations that make your whole experience worse, such as alcohol or whatever, and focus on the bits that you can manage, but always reach out. So, reach out to the services that are available, because both within the NHS and in the university, there are services that will help and support you.
The next question I'm going to direct to Jordan. What's the difference between resilience and arrogant?
Massive difference. I mean, resilience for me was the ability to overcome, be at rock bottom, be in hospital. I was in hospital, I was in a coma, I had sepsis, I had my stomach removed. I now have 2 stomas. I then had the scar wasn't healing, I then got moved to a cancer hospital. And I was able to remain resilient throughout all of that. I don't think I was arrogant about it at any stage. I mean, I like to think I wasn't. So I don't think there's a link there. Resilience for me is to be able to face trauma, and then can it lead you to triumph? Arrogance is letting your ego take hold of you, in my opinion. But maybe I've got the wrong end of the question.
No, I think that's definitely, Julie, do you want to come in on that? Arrogance versus resilience, 2 different concepts.
Totally different concepts. And I agree with Jordan on that last comment there. For me, they're totally different. Arrogance is purely ego driven in my view, whereas resilience is something else entirely, mainly because resilience takes courage. It takes courage because you recognize that things are not going well. You need to put your head above the parapet sometimes. And if I think through my own experiences of having to crowdfund to get to raise money for treatment for a poorly husband a few years ago, because that was the only route to go to pay for life-saving treatment for him. If I hadn't had the resilience to stick my hand up and say, I need help to do this, I can't do this by myself. If I hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have had a community of people that came together to support that. Did I get criticism for doing that? Yes, Did I get unkind comments for doing that? Yes. Was I bothered? A little bit. But what was really important to me in that situation was, well, we live in a free country, it's free speech, it is what it is. But on the other hand, my focus was, I have a really, really poorly and sick member of my family who needs help, and we're running out of time to get access to this treatment. So for me, it was focusing on the end goal of getting access to that treatment for him. And I would do whatever I needed to do, being the healthy one, because when you're sick and you're poorly, and he did have a huge amounts of resilience to get through what he got through, but he needed that extra lift to get us over the finishing line. So for me, totally different emotions or points of view.
So the next question is about COVID, really. How can you build on resilience when you're scared to go out and believe you'll get COVID? Nikki, would you have any comments on that?
I would say I'm a great one for normalizing things. I think if you think about the rest of the population, people are fearful. People are worried about resuming life. People are worried about catching COVID. And what I would say, again, is break it into small chunks. Even if you just walk down to the end of your close, that's fine. That's an achievement. You've gone out. You know, go out at a time of day in the first instance where there aren't as many people around. And I certainly, before I had my first jab, was really worried about getting COVID myself and passing it on to family members. So I would go out and walk at 9 o'clock at night or at 7 o'clock in the morning when there's no one around. So I just think once you do that, you start to feel more comfortable. And the more we do something, the more able we feel to build on that and do it. So focus little and build is what I would say.
What about you, Jordan? Would you comment on resilience in this rather unusual time in COVID times?
Yeah, I think it resonates with me quite a lot, that question again, because obviously I was highly vulnerable as well. So I had that fear in me. I think you can only really concentrate on the variables you can control. So as long as you know you're doing everything right, and you're within reason, as Nikki said, if it's going for walks earlier or later or staying out of the way of populated areas, but as long as you're doing what you can and building slowly, I think that's probably the best thing you can do. And that's certainly what I did.
Julie, would you want to add to that?
Yes, I think it's about being sensible, isn't it? And what's manageable for you. And likewise, Jordan, I can appreciate what it's been like to be on the vulnerable list and to be shielding. You know, it's looking after yourself to look after the broader community at the end of the day, isn't it? And that said, going out again can possibly feel a little bit anxious because we're now not used to being in crowds of people. And if there are more than about 6 people around you in the immediate vicinity, you feel that that's a crowd now. But yes, I think the advice Nikki shared there about going out at different times of the day that are quieter in your area that you live, certainly a good tip to start with. And just baby steps, isn't it? It's like with anything in life, really. If you're worried about finances or job situation, again, it's what can you do? What's manageable? And you always have a choice, I think, in life as to how you want to visualize the outcome. You always have the choice to visualize a bad outcome or a good outcome. So if those are your 2 choices, visualize the good outcome and take the precautions that the government's, to the government guidelines that are current right now. And I think that's possibly the way forward for many people.
So I think our last question, what are the panelists' thought on persevering through difficulties versus making changes? So I guess that's about how do you discern when you should, just take a breath, it will pass, or should I do something, make a change now? Nikki?
I think even if you're persevering through something, you will be making little changes to manage that. Because COVID's a good example, isn't it? We all believe that eventually things will get better. So if you believe that if you just ride the storm, things will get better, that wouldn't be enough, would it? I think there's still stuff within that you can do, little changes you can make to manage your physical health, little changes you can make to manage your mental health, little changes you can make to develop more self-awareness or look at your emotional responses to things. So no matter what situation we're in, there's always little changes to be made that will improve our experience.
Jordan, would you add to that?
Yeah, I think fully agree with what Nikki said. During lockdown, I've been, which I've never have done before, but I've been running every morning at 6 a.m. I also rather tragically start my day with a bit of a dance, put some tunes on, get ready with some music on. And I would never have preempted that before COVID. So I think that people make small changes that can benefit their life and can work as a positive. But I also think maybe in terms of the bigger scale, knowing your worth, and whether it's relationship or job, you know your own worth. And if the job isn't making you happy, or that relationship isn't making you happy, or that group of friends aren't, you have to look at yourself and think, is this really been a positive for me, or can I do better? And if you can do better, I'm a big believer in letting it go, that things will pass and you'll still be here.
Julie, would you add anything?
It's definitely to build on what we've heard from Nikki and Jordan. I think it's really important to remember that we're living things, so we don't stand still, and we're always growing. So I think part of persevering through difficult times is being hopeful that things will change and get better. Because if you're in a difficult time, the hope is that it's going to get better, not worse. And so, as Jordan was saying, in lockdown, I mean, for myself as well, I've made different changes to routines, and the things that I do in my day is different, with not going out and no commuting and no spending time in the car endlessly every day. And so even the smallest things are steps towards building a different version of you, which is hugely important.
Yeah, hugely important. We're just coming towards the end, so I'd just like to kind of ask each of you maybe to give your final thoughts or your final tips to people who are listening. Jordan, can I start with you?
You can. Tips would be keep positive, stay positive, write a gratitude list, do things that make you feel good, whether it's listening to music, watching your favorite film, watching reruns of The Office. Keep healthy, make sure you're getting the correct amount of sleep, and having an end vision of yes, it's tough now, but where do you want it to go? Where would the dream be? And I think if you do that, take small steps, have small goals day by day, you can't go far wrong.
Julie, your last thoughts.
Jordan, you said it all. That was a really good summary. And I think on top of that, for people to remember that you will get through this. You are worthy, you are valuable, and you are loved, and you are supported. Tap into those resources.
Great. Nikki?
It's all been mentioned, exactly what I would say. Actually, I would just add, reach out to others and treat yourself with the kindness and compassion you would treat those you love the most. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, that is definitely. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to the panelists, Nikki, Julie and Jordan. And also thanks very much, everyone, for a huge amount of questions. We had lots and lots of questions from you. Sorry if I didn't get through them all. But yeah, we really value your input. And I think it's been a great discussion. Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much. Thank you.
Bye.